Okay, everybody ready for part 2? Pardon? Yeah. Let's go. Containers and DevOps. So far we've looked at creating containers, how we set up the infrastructure to run containers, and we've made an application. The application isn't going to get any more sophisticated than what you've seen so far, because I don't really care about what the application is doing. It's just the concept of how you work with containers that I want to cover. So DevOps, how many of you are actually looking at this whole DevOps stuff that's come around? Okay, excellent. So DevOps has a vague definition. I'm not even going to try and define it. Everybody has their own idea, or at least one idea. What people do tend to agree on is that there's a set of practices that if you're doing these and you've got your processes in place and everything else, then you are a DevOps type environment. The most important ones, infrastructure as code. How many of you have got setup scripts for creating virtual machines, configuring your servers, all of that sort of stuff? Yeah. How many of you are source controlling those scripts? Wow. I did not expect that. That is absolutely brilliant. If you're using infrastructure as code and you've got scripts that you're basically creating your environments from, or they're controlling your environments, make sure you source control them. Continuous delivery, continuous deployment. I had to put what they actually were because I can never remember. Continuous delivery is that you could deploy every change to your application. Continuous deployment is that you do deploy every change. It's a bit of semantics, bit of wordplay, but the idea with continuous delivery deployment is that your application gets changed, it goes through testing, and it automatically gets deployed. And infrastructure as code and the continuous delivery deployment of applications is really the heart of these DevOps practices. Continuous integration is all of your testing and your build processes. Automated testing. How many of you use Pester? Yeah? If you want to know more about it, go to June's talk, whenever that is. Or if you can't get to June's talk, we've got a recording of it on the PowerShell.org YouTube channel. There'll be a recording from this. And then you get into the standard things like performance monitoring, load testing, blah. And then everybody's favorite, change and configuration management. How many are doing change management? How many are doing change management really? How many people love change management? Nobody likes it, but it's the bit that when things go wrong, you've got the bit of paper that says, this is an authorized change, I'm allowed to do this. The fact that it went wrong is not my fault. Automated deprovisioning, how many of you created VMs that are still around 10 years, well not 10 years, but 5 years later because nobody's ever got around to killing them off? Yeah. You're untidy, you are. You should get rid of those servers. But most organizations have servers that are still floating around that they don't get rid of. So automated deprovisioning goes through and cleans away the environment, gets rid of those things. Self-service, that's the bit that really makes me shudder, letting everybody in and create VMs and use my resources. And no, don't like that. Unfortunately, it's part of the practices. And then you've got the testing in production. That's always a fun thing to do. Deliberately injecting faults into your applications. Anybody do that? It's great fun. Just let people know that you're doing it before the monitoring team starts panicking. Though actually, if you don't like the monitoring team, don't bother letting them know. That's even more fun. Okay, so in terms of containers, you're going to fit into these sorts of practices. Obviously, infrastructure as code. You've seen how quick it is to set up containers once you've got the underlying host configured for them. The bit that I'm going to talk about in this session is more the continuous delivery deployment type thing, but also you've got opportunities for automated scaling. If you've got something like a commercial web farm like Amazon, for instance, they're going to have peaks of traffic, around Thanksgiving, around the run-up to Christmas, those sorts of times. So automatic scaling says, okay, my websites are getting busy. Let's bring up some more instances of this website until the traffic gets down to a level that those machines can support. And we keep monitoring, and if we need more, we'll bring more up. When the traffic levels die down, we'll get rid of them and put the thing back to normal. Automated recovery, the roll back and roll forward. If you've got a container, you change the application, you've got another container. You've seen how quick it is to stop and start containers. Shut the new one down, bring the old one back up, you're back and running. And then testing in production, because you've got the ability to spin up containers very quick, you can bring one up, you can play with it, you can experiment with it, you can try and break it, and if you do break it, because you've got other instances of that container running with your application, you're not actually going to do a massive amount of damage, hopefully. There's always the chance, which is just keeps everybody awake. So, as with everything else, we've got a process. You've seen some of this already in the first presentation. You create your base container, you install your application. In the case of what I was doing, it's just a very simple website. You create a container image. I've got versioning in bold, and that is very, very important. Remember when I created the... Oh, by the way, was everybody in the first presentation? Oh, you have to be quick. We can take some stuff offline. I'll try and catch you up. If you remember when I created the container image, I gave it a version. Every time you change the application and generate a new version of that image, give it a new version. And that means that you can duplicate the containers off that image quite easily. You export the container image, copy it wherever you need it, import it back again, and then you can create a new container. And that takes us back to doing stuff. As I think it was Jeff White has said in Amsterdam, this is a PowerShell conference, not a PowerPoint conference. Which I love that phrase. So I've got, if you were awake at 9 o'clock when we started, you recognize the first host name as the one we were using then. Beg pardon? Can I make that bigger? Yeah, that's no problem. Let me know when it's big enough. Is that okay from the back? Excellent. Okay, so the first host there, ending in test, is the one that we were using this morning, and I've got a very imaginatively named production box, or what I'm pretending is a production box is probably closer to the truth. So let's create a couple of remote sessions. And if you remember, we left that on the test box that we were working with. We created that image. So we created a container, we installed IIS in it, and then we created an image from it. Yeah, you remember that? So we've got the server core image, which is the OS image, and then on top of that we've got the IIS image. Right. So to export a container image, as you would expect, it's export container image, command.naming It usually is not very difficult to figure out. It takes a little while to run. One important thing, the base OS image, this one, you cannot export that. You have to install that from the WIM file. The documentation says you can't, and not trusting documentation, I actually tried it, and it just says, no, not going to do that. So while that's running, for anybody who wasn't in the session, what we did was we created we took a VM, we installed the Windows container feature. So is that finished?
Here's the picture.
Ah, okay, yeah. Good idea, thank you. So we took a virtual machine, we installed the containers feature, we then took a WIM file from the PS gallery, brought that down and created the OS image from it. The other alternative is to install it directly straight from the gallery, but watching 3 gigs of data copied down is not a good session. And I wouldn't be invited again if I kept you entertained by doing that. So once you've got your image installed, you can create a container. You need some networking setting up, so a virtual switch for the container to work on that you create on the host. You can either use a transparent mode, which means that you're using DHCP to assign IP addresses, or you're using NAT from within the host. Once you've got a container running, you can configure it. What we did was install IIS, and once we'd done that, we took an image from that. So you've got your base OS image, you create a container, you modify the container, and then you take an image of that container. And that's really the delta between the original OS image and what your container looks like now. And once you've got that image, you can then create containers from that. So, we've exported that IIS image, and if we look at the files, it creates this APXX file. We can then copy the image into production. So first, I'm actually, for safety's sake, I've just done this as a 2-step process. So I'm copying that down to my host machine. Remember Jeffrey showed this yesterday, that you can copy across a remoting session? The bit that he left out is that you can only do it from a session or to a session. You can't use both of them because they're mutually exclusive, which I think they missed a trick there.
So not at the same time?
No, you can't. No, when you use copy item, the from session and to session are mutually exclusive, and you can only use one of them. So you could, in theory, do the pipe these two things together so that it would just run as one command. But just to have more control for the demo, I'm doing them as 2 separate steps. So what I've done in the first step is I've copied that image that we created, that we exported, down onto my C drive. I'm now copying it onto my production box. And as you can see from the size, they're not that big. If you remember that the original OS image was around about 3 gigs, this is just the delta. It's 170 meg, so it's not that big by comparison. Obviously, the more that you've put into the container and the more configuration you've done, the bigger it's going to get, but it's not ever going to get gigantic. So we can look in prediction box, just check that that's there. We can import this into the production box. Notice that the image contains the version. That becomes very important for keeping track of these files. That, again, takes just a little while to run. So on the production box, I'd already installed the base image. So that step had already been done. This, just again, for saving time, because you don't want to watch something just churning away for 10 minutes while we're doing this. So is everybody happy with what we've done so far? We've taken our container that we configured. We've exported, or we've created an image from that we've used to create other containers on our test box. We've then exported that image to APX file. We've then copied that APX file onto another machine. We're importing that image onto that machine. Once that's finished, hopefully, we can then create containers from that image. And that container, as you can see from the name here, uses the image we've just copied in, and it will have all of the IIS stuff configured. So I'm creating the container, I'm setting up the static mapping, and because I'm using the switch name, it will automatically add a network adapter to that container. So there's our container, and we'll do that. There should only be one container on there, but I put that in for safety's sake because when I was developing this, I made a mistake and got into an awful mess. So that's just for safety's sake. Now, the production host is 156, so we'll just see if IIS is running. And that's how you move a container from machine to machine and move your application from test to development. Simple. Yeah? It's not that difficult. It's a file copy. What it comes down to is a file copy. That's what makes it easy. If you think about moving an application from test or dev to test or test to production, you've got to stand up on your machine, you've got to copy all the files across, you've then got to install them, you've got to then make sure it's configured correctly, and the devs haven't told you how they've configured it, or they've forgotten, and you're then going round the loop with them to try and get that working. This takes all of that away. You've got a working application. You've exported it to a file. You've moved that file. You've imported it to give you a new image, and you've brought a container up with that application up and running. So you've taken away all of that, all of those issues.
So one question about backup and restore is just doing a backup of this file.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you need to, yes, you do need to back up and restore. But yeah, you're backing up. You can back up the
application.
You can back up the images. You can back up the APX files. You can back up your development files, obviously. And that will give you the whatever level of protection that you need.
Can you also back up the running container?
Can you back up the running container? I don't honestly know. It depends on what backup software you've got. There are mechanisms for taking backups of running virtual machines. If you've got something like that, in theory, I would expect it to take containers. If it doesn't now, it should do it sometime in the future. But if you've got the image and the APX files backed up, that's your ultimate safety net, because it doesn't take long to recreate these if you need them. Okay, so we've rolled our application out into production. We've decided that we need to upgrade that application, or we've created a new version. So we're going to go back to our test machine. We're going to stop the containers. We're going to create a new image, because remember we originally installed IIS and it had that default page. We then changed the default page so that it had TST, so that we knew what we were looking at. So rather than being the default page, it looks like that. That's our new version of our application that we want to roll out, because currently what we've got is that. So we want to go from that to our next version, which looks like that. So we need to stop the container and create a new container image. And we do that back on our test machine. And if you remember from earlier on, that just takes a few minutes to run. This is all new to all of us, unless you've been working with Docker on Linux. Is everybody happy with what I'm doing here? Do you want me to go through the process again and make sure that you've got it in your mind what I'm doing? Yeah? Okay. From the top, you install the containers feature and whatever networking aspects that you need. You can then create a container off the base OS image. You then configure that container, and from that configured container, you create a new image.
Oh, was
yeah.
already.
Yeah, I'm getting old. I can't. I've done enough standing for now. You then take that container and create a new image from that. That will allow you then to create clones, effectively create clones of that configured container with multiple instances of your application. What you do then is export that image, which gives you the APBX file. You can copy that to one or more machines, import it, and then you can create containers configured like your original container on that new machine. So what this shows down at the bottom here, this is our original OS image.
So the cloned container makes it harder to maintain licensing.
Okay, licensing, I'm not qualified to discuss. Yeah, I have not seen any statements about how this would all be licensed, and I would not presume to even hint at anything. It will be announced, I'm assuming. We then created, back in the first session, we created this image, which is our 1.0. We then modified the container to have the TST label on the page, and we've just created an image from that, which is our 1.1. Remember, you can't export the OS image, but you can export our new one. Notice that when you're defining the image that you want to export, you need to give it the name and the version. Remember I said right at the top that versioning of these things gets very important.
If you leave the version number, what version is?
It'll take the
The
first.
best one or the
It
first
I
match, or
think
or it's
it.
just random? Or?
I think it takes the first one it finds. I will test that, but I think it takes the first one it finds. Just be aware that you need that. If you've got multiple versions, you just need to control the versions and make sure that you use the correct versions. Any other questions?
So the containers are almost like encapsulated delta.
So you're saying that the container is like an encapsulated delta?
Yeah, is that type of idea?
Okay. The container image is an encapsulated delta. Yeah. So if we go back to that list of images that we had, the comment was about are these images encapsulated deltas, and that's absolutely true. So this was our original that we created the first container from. When we got it, the original configuration just with IIS running, we created this one. And if you remember the size difference, this if you remember the size difference, the file that we copied after we'd exported that was about 170 meg, as opposed to this thing which was quite big in the gigabytes. So it is, as Tim said, it's just the delta that you've got in these. And then we've created another delta here to be our second version. And I'm just going to copy that image across. I'll just run those back to back. This being able to copy across remoting sessions is absolutely brilliant. It makes life much, much easier.
So what happens if you give a fictive number there?
Sorry, if you give a
fictive number, so 2 dot.
Oh, so if it
something
doesn't actually exist, well, it's like any copy. If it can't find what you're trying to copy, it will just break.
Okay.
When I was developing this, I knew at this point I know what the version numbers are going to be, so I can I can do it explicitly. If you're doing this for whatever reason, you can always do get child item to find the image, the particular APX file that you want, and copy that across. Use that as the input to the copy. So that's moved into our production box. We'll see the files that. You idiot. We'll be copying it again, sorry. Yeah, so if you forget the image, because it's just a file, you can do a get child item on the folder that you got them in, and either check what the full name of it is, or just use a filter on get child item to pick out the file that you want and pass that into to copy item. But it's like anything. If you're dealing with files, it's very, very simple. Right. So we've now got our 2 files on the production box, and we'll import the new one. And again, even for the import, you can use the filter features on get child item to pick out the one that you want. If you don't know the explicit name. I would tend to try and use the full name of it if you possibly can, just for safety's sake. And once that's installed, we can create a container from it. And it's going to be just a standard container creation process that you've seen a couple of times. You just need to give it the name, tell it which image that you're using. When you get to this stage, you need to be careful that you're using the correct container image. Otherwise, you won't get what you're expecting. And because I've told it which switch to use, it will automatically add a network adapter and connect that to the switch. These never seem to take as long when you're testing them at home before you actually stand up and do them. Any other questions while we're waiting for this to run? And everybody clear on the process that we're doing and what we're doing here?
Side question, antivirus, we scan also our web servers. And I think make an antivirus product part of the container, but still somewhere far away.
Sorry, say again.
To have antivirus on those containers.
Oh, antivirus the containers. Ooh, that's a nice one. Well, you've got a couple of options there. One is that Windows Defender is going to be an optional feature, so you've got that. You could install your own antivirus into the container. You could pray and just hope that it's probably not the most optimal solution. Containers are actually files the same as VMs are, so you don't really want to be scanning those, especially not live. So I think if you need AV inside your website, then your best bet is getting something installed into the container. Okay, so that's now imported, so we will create a container from that new image. And our cutover is as simple as, actually if we run the whole thing, is as simple as stopping one container and starting another. And at this stage, if we go back to our production box, which is 156, we should have test. So we've developed an application in our container. We've moved that lock, stock, and barrel, complete, so the container and the application from, in this case, dev through straight into production. Obviously, you can do it as a two-step or however many steps you need in your process to go through whatever testing you need to do. But assuming that it all passes, you can then just keep moving that image along the pipeline until you get to your production box. You install the image, you bring up a container from it, and your application's in production, up and running, all your configurations sorted out because it's all in the container. It's a nice, simple deployment mechanism. You change your application, you go through the process again, you get the new image onto your production box, you create a container from it, you stop the old one, you start the new one, and off you go. And then your boss comes along and says, but you spelled test wrong. So you need to roll it back. And rollback is literally this simple. I'm not going to try and refresh that because it doesn't play nicely. And at that stage, you go back to your 156 website and you've rolled it back. And that is how simple roll forward and roll back is using containers. It literally is stop the container that you've got running and start the new one. And that's how you use containers in your DevOps processes. It's very, very straightforward. Once you've got your application initially in the container. And you know the best way of doing that? Make that the developer's job. Okay, any questions on that so far? No? Right. The other bit that I wanted to show you was, would you like to see containers on Nano server? Oh, God. That hurt. Sorry about that. I think I got a little bit too close to that and I got a bunch of feedback in my ear.
Have you published the script somewhere?
I haven't because I was still playing with them while I was doing this. Okay.
You will do that?
Yeah, I'll make them available. So Nano server, as you saw yesterday, is a very, very small footprint Windows server. You saw earlier on how quick it is to create a Nano server machine. So how many people weren't in the first session? Okay, this is worth doing again then. To create a Nano server machine, there, because I need the code, I need that. So if you look on the media, the ISO for, right, that's all set. So for Service 2016, you'll see a Nano folder. There is a bunch of stuff on there that you need to copy off. And it's this script. Actually, I'll make that a little bit bigger and then you can see it at the back. Is that better? Okay. So you need to copy off this script, the WIM file, the image generator module, and the packages and tools. The packages contain a set of cab files. This is why I don't type demos.
You've forgotten the packages. Not packages.
Are you in a different room?
Yeah,
It's just
yeah,
LS.
I need to change folder. Actually, let's do it this way.
Yeah,
Okay, so these are the packages that you get. So Compute installs the Hyper-V feature, containers, obviously Defender, DNS, DSC is there, failover clustering, IIS, drivers, storage, reverse forwarders, and your bits and pieces for SCVMM. So to actually build a fully functional, ready to go, installed into your domain machine, you run this. Okay. That piece of code. What it does is take the Nano server WIM file. It will create a virtual disk. In this case, the reuse domain node parameter is saying that when you join it to AD, use the existing computer account of the same name rather than throwing an error. In TP4, it's restricted to US English for the language. Base path tells it where it can find all the stuff that it needs. Target path gives you the path to the virtual disk that you want to create. You give it a size, you tell it what you want to install from those packages that you saw. So in this case, we're doing the guest drivers, the reverse forwarders, the Hyper-V, and the containers. Give it a name, tell it the domain you want to join, set the IP address and the subnet mask, and enable the remote management port that Jeffrey showed you yesterday. In TP4, this only runs from the console. It doesn't seem to want to run in IIS. Right, don't blink. So it goes off, it creates an empty virtual disk. It starts initializing the disk, it creates your system partition, it creates your Windows partition. Right, that's the OS installed. It's now installing copying the image, and it's then going to start installing the packages. So that's installing the packages. So if you remember, it was the drivers, Hyper-V, containers. It's also going to set the IP address. It's set the subnet mask. In TP4, it doesn't set the DNS servers, but it does set the default gateway. And it's joining it to the domain. So that was the guest package. It's installed the compute package. There's the reverse forwarders package going through, containers package going in. So installing these packages is the equivalent of running add Windows feature in an existing Windows machine. That is done. So from scratch, that's creating a virtual machine, a virtual disk that you can now connect to a virtual machine. When that boots, it will give you an instance of Nano server joined to the domain, the static IP address, configured with the Hyper-V and containers features. And that is literally how quick it is to get these things up and running. And if you look at the size of the disk that it's contained, actually, let's do that here. Make more sense. And if you want to know what that is,
The other way around.
776 megabytes is your disk image for a fully set up OS, ready to go. That's why you can get a lot of these on a given machine. If you remember, I said earlier that there's one of the PowerShell MVPs had got a 64 gig box that he spun up 380 something Nano servers on. That's the sort of packing density that you get on these things. Okay, so that was just a little aside in creating Nano server. I wanted to demonstrate containers on Nano server. It's very much the same. As what you've seen so far. just with a few subtle subtle differences. So let's run that so we can see that that's a. So it's already got the containers feature installed. You can create the network switch exactly the same, and that's up and running. I've gone through this already just to move things along because some of these takes a little while. I've installed the natting, and I've already installed the provider. So we've got the no, we won't do that. Beep, 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 beep. So again, I've installed it from a saved image. So at this point, and to create a container, it's exactly the same as you've seen before.
Maybe you should change the name.
It doesn't matter because it's isolated within the containers. Because of the natting and everything, you don't see this outside.
Within its bubble, yeah.
Yeah, so it's within its host. The names need to be unique within the host, but you can have the same name in multiple hosts. I just can't remember quite where I got to in this. So just going to double check because I don't really want to try and create the set. Yes, I already have created that. I fell foul of that once before. So you create the container in the same way, and I'm sure I've done this. Okay, that's where we want it to be. Now, one of the features of Nano Server is that it's very, very tiny. Okay, part of that, as Jeffrey said yesterday, is that the source code for all of the Windows features is not on the box. It's outside in those cab files. When you create a Nano Server, you can use those cab files to install the features. But we want to get IIS running in a container, which gets a little tricky. So what you've got to do is copy the cab file up onto the Nano Server, get it into the container using a shared folder, and then use DISM to actually apply it. And you need an attended XML file, which is which looks like this. It's very simple. So you're just telling it to install the IIS package. It's about as simple as it can get. So I'm just going to let that run. Once you've got this configured, you could then take the cab file off of the Nano Server to get rid of it and get your space back. So any questions on Nano Server or...
You said take it off the file, so does the same apply with patches? And for example, if you patch it, can you take the files off afterwards? For example, now we have issues with servers that are running low in disk space because of the WinSXX folder, just filling up and I can't clean it. Yeah,
you can clean out, if you apply patches, you can clean out the files that the patches have left behind. You know, very often creates a backup of the files that it's modifying. You can get rid of those.
Okay.
I've done it on a regular basis on machines with small disks. I tend to leave it for a little while, so that if I'm patching this month, I might remove the files from a couple of months ago, just to give me the chance to roll back that patch if something nasty comes up after it's been applied. But there's nothing to stop you removing those files. So that's run. You get this sort of feedback as it's running, which is more than enough to let you know what's happening. Interesting how it calculates that it's 26.2% of the way through, but I'm not going to argue. And then we'll just stop and start the container, just to make sure IIS comes up. I love the speed that they stop and start. I wish everything did it that quick. One interesting thing that if you weren't in the earlier session, you won't necessarily have picked up on is notice what I'm doing. I'm running invoke command against that session with this script block. The first thing that I've got in the script block is invoke command to get into the container. Double hop doesn't exist when you're using containers. So you can do that. You can actually enter PS session into your host and then enter PS session into your container as well.
Can you also use using?
Beg pardon?
Using. You can use external variables.
Yeah, I haven't tried it. I would assume yes until proven otherwise, unless Kenneth knows better.
Someone should try it.
Yeah.
I'm
we'll
just nodding at the question.
yeah.
I don't think I tested that.
Yeah. So the question is, can you use using when you're doing that double remoting? In theory.
But using a double hop is something totally different.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it should work one of
Yeah. But when I showed this sort of thing earlier on, somebody jumped up and started shouting about double hops, and I just wanted to make the point that it's not double hop because you're not going out to in effect, you're not going out to a new machine, you're just going to a container on the machine.
So the container does not have a security context. It runs in the same context as the host machine.
Yes, so that you can remote into it. We can try the using later on. If I get time from preparing for the additional session this afternoon. So, invoke command, get into the container. I'm stopping the service, just copying a file into the IIS folders and then starting the service again. I just wanted you to be aware that you can nest invoke commands like this. And then once that's done, we'll just double check that it's there. And it works. So the only real difficulty and difference with containers on Nano server is the fact that you need to use a slightly convoluted mechanism to get the Windows features into the container. Everything else just works the same. And your host is so much smaller, so there's more of your resources going for containers, and you can pack more onto your box.
Can you check now the file size of the Nano server included in the container?
Yeah, actually, let's have a look at this. So that's the Nano server. The only reason it's using 512 is that on a 2012 R2 box, that's the minimum memory that you can allow it. In terms of the file size, we won't get very far with that one. It will be ls. Oh, actually, let's do it this way. CD. that's,
Okay, so 900.
yeah. $932 for a fully
Yes.
a full version of Windows, or a version of Windows OS running a container running IIS. Now, obviously, if you've got a fully featured website, that's going to get a little bit bigger, but not massively.
Richard, if I want to go around the package problem and creating a container on the full server and moving a container to a Nano server, the package is already running.
Okay, right. The question was, can I rephrase your question? It was, can you create it on a full GUI server and move it? Okay. In TP4, no. I suppose if it's a Hyper-V container, yes, you can. This is the bit that's going to bite you on that, because you've got some restrictions on what sorts of what the base OS for your container is, depending on what your host is. So at the moment, for TP4, these are the restrictions. We need to see what happens in TP5 as to where that goes and what can actually happen. I would hope that some of these would go away. So in theory, if you can create the container on whatever host that you want, and in actually using that analogy of using a full GUI version and using the Nano OS, you could use it if you create it as a Hyper-V container, because you can move a Hyper-V container into be a Windows container and vice versa. So yes, you could. You just need to be, at the moment, you just need to do it a little cleverly. We'll see what happens in the next TP as to whether that gets any easier or not.
So you have to track and watch where you create the container.
Yeah, you need to be aware of what the final outcome you want from your container, where you want it to end up running. So you can't create at the moment a container using a server core base image and run it on Nano server, and vice versa, unless you're going to be just creating it as Hyper-V containers. It's a technology preview. It's not fully featured, and as I said right at the very beginning, this is TP4. TP5 is coming out shortly, so I expect some changes. Any other questions? Comments? Can you see this being useful? Yeah. For people who weren't in the earlier session, let's quickly run through a couple of things. Yeah, the bit at the bottom there, for TP4, you can only manage containers, but either through PowerShell or through Docker. If you create a container with PowerShell, Docker won't see it, and vice versa. That's changing in TP5, as far as I'm aware. It's a restriction in TP4. It's documented on the Microsoft website, container website, that it's a known restriction and it is changing. But just if you decide to jump in and experiment with TP4, just be aware of that. And yeah, remember the containers aren't Docker. Docker is the API for managing them. Windows containers versus Hyper-V containers, differences in the isolation, the startup speed, applications and OS trust relationships are different in that the Windows containers trust things on Hyper-V, nothing gets trusted, and the way memory is used varies from whether it's a Windows container or a Hyper-V container. And we've looked at the host and container combinations.
What was that? You have to patch the base OS? Oh no, you have to patch the containers if you patch the base OS.
If you patch the host,
So how does this work if you move a container to another operating system like Linux, which should be possible using containers, right?
I don't know whether that is going to be possible.
I mean, if it's Docker, it should be possible, right?
No, Docker's just the API for managing containers.
Okay, but wasn't it the whole idea that you can move stuff also to other operating systems and not just be...
This is a 1.0 version, remember?
Okay.
Ultimately, it may be possible. I suspect that that's... I'd be interested to try it, and I will try it on TP5, but
I think we all know Microsoft. It's a tiny bit not working.
I'm not sure that that's totally correct.
99% working, you can move.
No, I'm not sure that I can accept that statement. Beg pardon?
Containers have less isolation than VMs.
Yeah.
I mean, containers, you get the performance and speed reduction because of the associations that they're making with the host.
Yeah.
It's some level. And that's why when you go back up to your difference between Microsoft and virtual, it's just, LX Core does it, but you can't necessarily take one of those and move them around.
Yeah.
It's just, there's less.
Yeah. Yeah, and you wouldn't necessarily have the bits on Linux to support the Windows containers.
Otherwise you would install.
Right, that's the point. You have to have the bits.
Yeah.
At some point, it's like the bits have disappeared, except for Nano. They're disappear, right? Because they're small. They're basic. Bits haven't gone anywhere. They're still there. They're just being leveraged.
One question about what is the difference if the Hyper-V container and the Nano server? It should be more or less the same.
This is a restriction in TP4, and I just wanted you to be aware of, because when I put this together, I wasn't aware that TP5 was coming out so soon. So that if people started experimenting with this, they were aware of these restrictions and not spend a lot of time trying to install something in a non-compatible version. What is going to change in TP5, I don't know, but I would assume that being able to run Nano images, container images on server core or the full UI would be a sensible move. I would like to be able to do that.
Are you connected to the developing team?
No.
At Microsoft?
No. I don't work for Microsoft. I've never worked for Microsoft. I never will work for Microsoft.
And you're not a fanboy?
To answer that question, Microsoft have provided me and my family with a living for many, many years. So yes, from that viewpoint, very definitely. I'm multi-year PowerShell MVP, so I have a very good relationship with the PowerShell team. The container team is something totally different. I've done some books, which you may or may not have read, do a lot of blogging. I've been around IT for 20-odd years, and I help run PowerShell.org and the US summits. So in summary, containers are lightweight virtualization for application delivery. They're available in Server 2016 and Windows 10. You can run them as Windows containers, which run inside a virtual machine, or you can run them directly on top of Hyper-V. Containers you can create from server core or Nano server images, and they're an ideal DevOps mechanism. So with that, I'm done, unless there's another question.
I have a question. Is it possible
Windows containers to Azure containers?
On Grace.
I think, was that a yes from somebody?
Yeah, because if you run your machines in Azure with your Windows machines, that's the idea.
What about
Yeah.
patch level?
Okay.
Well, yeah, but you just need to be aware of what you're doing with that and making sure that everything matches up. The same as you would need to do with everything else that in the container that you're wanting to move.
From developer to production to Azure, same way.
Yeah. So, okay. Any other questions? Thank you very much.